Hello everyone, welcome back. It's been a while since I've posted a video to this channel. It has been a long and interesting ride to end out 2024. You probably have noticed that my chair may be the same, but my backdrop is very different. I'm in a new space and I can briefly tell you about it before we get into today's video. Most of my updates are actually good updates. They're actually very positive updates. So I got engaged and I moved into a new house with my fiance. So very exciting. We are still unpacking, but I finally have an office space that I'll be able to dedicate to making videos, just doing some creative work. And I am going to continue just talking about topics that interest me. Any of my A24 fans out here will probably enjoy this relatively unscripted take on the new movie, I Saw the TV Glow. Before we get into it, make sure that you subscribe, leave a comment, like this video, do all the things. I really want to get my channel to a point where it can be monetized so I can actually dedicate more time and resources and get better equipment. Right now I'm on my iPhone, which it does shoot in 4K, which I'm very grateful for, but I'm just doing with what I have right now and I will grow. So I hope you will continue to grow with me and you will stick around for some of my scripted and unscripted babblings. Now, I hope that you will humor me because this one today is relatively unscripted. I initially did a TikTok about this right around the time that it came back this year. There's something that feels very tainted about TikTok coming back. Obviously, we know that it is censored now. There's a lot of issues around the platform, the search capabilities, not only with TikTok, but with Meta in general. And thank you for everybody who has given me some interaction, some encouragement, some just great feedback around what you want to hear more of. I really struggle as an overall creator, an author, just a creative artist type myself on what kind of niches to have, what kind of ways to pull myself into a pigeonhole in order to be a little bit digestible to general audiences, because I do have a background in digital marketing, but the more I try to do that for myself, the less fulfilled I feel. Thanks for all the housekeeping. Now we can get into the core video of what I want to talk about today. I Saw the TV Glow on a plane. And this was a movie I'd heard a bit about, as I'm sure a lot of people have, but I really don't think it got the mainstream attention and true microscope and focus on it that it really deserves. And that's for a variety of reasons, I'm sure, which we'll get into in this video. A24, we know it. They are slamming out bangerangs left and right. I rarely watch an A24 movie I don't like, and this one was no different. This movie, first I'm going to set it up, tell you what it's about, do a brief synopsis, and then we're going to go into a really interesting article I read about the ending. So, spoiler alert, we will talk about the ending and we will discuss, the pieces and acts of the film in somewhat detail regarding the imagery, regarding the meaning behind it, the repetition, the color, everything. All the things I geek out about when I watch artsy movies. You could call this depression media, you could call this, an introspective take on sovereignty, on identity. This director was trans, so we will be speaking to the different lenses and optics of how you can interpret this. So I Saw the TV Glow is a 3-act film, and it follows 2 characters. So the main character is Owen, and basically in the first act, you're introduced to this very almost dreamscape type of world where he seems to be in this, bubble of adolescence, right? You're growing up, you don't know the world yet, you're still on just these boundaries of school and these structured limits of life. He meets a girl named Maddie, and they end up watching and being fans of a show called The Pink Opaque. He ends up sneaking out of his parents' house because they don't want him watching this series. So The Pink Opaque is modeled in such a clever way. It's after Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Xena and those Monster of the Week shows. So it basically is this episodic series that's season to season of these 2 women who fight monsters and have this telepathic connection where they can connect spiritually together. Owen in the first act is, I would say, pretty young. I would say 10 or 11. And he goes to Maddie's house late at night in the basement. And from there, he's spellbound, basically. It's his favorite series. It just consumes him. And it's this really interesting little vignette. And that's what each of these acts are. It's this point in time. And I am such a sucker for time jump movies and A-B time skip things. A great example of storylines that are structured this way are Once Upon a Time, the first season, before it got really weird in later seasons, but the first season of Once Upon a Time, from a like storytelling perspective, from a structural, like scripted POV, is really brilliantly done. And if you're ever looking for how do I do these two storylines where one starts at the end and the beginning and then they converge and then they split off, that and The Last 5 Years, those are two just great narrative, character-driven stories that play with time. So I really enjoyed this. It wasn't a jump through time necessarily, but it was kind of timey-wimey, and it goes through different episodes of life. So he's 10 or 11 in the first episode. At the end of that episode, basically, Maddie disappears, and Owen doesn't know where she's going. She basically tells him that she can't live like this anymore. She can't live in this like boring, structured life that she's in. And she's probably a little older than him, but she basically asks to run away with him, and he says no. And so all we get at the end of the first act is that she seems to run away or have disappeared, and the only thing that they found in the backyard was the TV burning. And Act 1. Act 2 takes you a little bit further in time. So basically Owen is probably a young adult at this point. He's working at a movie theater. It's just very mundane. Like at this point in the film, there is this really interesting like melancholy. You really feel like even though there are some people in the periphery, they're purposely shoved to the periphery so you don't focus on them. But everything feels empty and devoid of like substance and of like anything fulfilling. And it's meant to make you feel that way. So the first and second acts, a lot of times, at least when I was watching it, I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I kept waiting. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the beautiful thing is that's a part of the point of the film. So I would say that, the payoff is beautiful. It's very just elegantly told. It's got this light brush stroke. It says so much without saying anything, especially with the visuals and the way that the story unfolds. And that's part of the experience. It's one of those things that you can't watch, like you can't get back after you watch it the first time. The second act, again, is he's a young adult, works at a movie theater. There's people there, but it almost just feels like a fishbowl effect. Not literally from a film perspective, but it just feels like Owen is just like stuck and he's just kind of going through the motions. One day he is at the grocery store and he sees Maddie out of nowhere, just standing there. And he just runs up to her and is like, oh my gosh, Maddie, where are you? Like, where have you been? How are you? And they go to a bar. He's trying to ask her what happened and she won't tell him. There's this reservation. Now, Maddie in the first act presented very female, feminine, like had long hair. And in this one, her hair is shorter. And that's an important point later. She tries to just ease into, asking him about, have you thought about the Pink Opaque and what happened since we watched that? Now, a detail is the Pink Opaque abruptly ended at the season 5 finale. It just stopped after that. You learn that in this act with her when afterwards he goes home and watches the season finale again. And you can tell she's trying to say something without saying something at the bar. She's saying things like, have you ever, felt like time doesn't work correctly? Have you ever felt like your memories are jumbled and like you can't quite piece things together? So then you start finding that there's this like meta aspect to the film where you have to stop and go, wait a second. What is she implying? Is this, feeling of hollowness in the film, is this like a way of echoing this, sense that it's all a dream, It's not as reductive as that, don't worry. He goes home and starts watching the episode, and you start seeing these kind of glimpses, almost like when you're changing a station in a radio, but visually, you're changing these channels and there's this like static, there's this sense of like something's not right, something's not sitting well. And you start seeing these glimpses of Owen. And maybe that's not what happened when they were watching the Pink Opaque. Maybe that's not all that happened. Things just start peeling back. It's almost like you start seeing behind the curtain. You start seeing who Oz really is. And what you find is there's this exploration and like really interesting way of visually showcasing this where, Owen was wearing a dress and exploring his identity. And that's where I think the trans aspect of the story is so loud. Obviously, the director is trans. And there's this really, poignant scene in the second act where he starts to remember this stuff and realizes that maybe this isn't real. Maybe this isn't what I think. And then he agrees to meet up with Maddie again. And there's this fascinating scene where Maddie is just in this room. I forget where they meet, but it's this very, you know, it looks like a dome almost. And there's this big storytelling of domes. And when Owen's a kid, if you're a kid in the 90s, you know that we used to do the, oh my gosh, those parachutes where we would all grab a side and it would like go up and it would be this big dome and you could play and like run underneath and play cat and mouse and things like that. He is in there, and I believe it's in the trans flag colors as well, which, like, beautiful. They're in this like dome structure where they meet up, and it's this uncut clip of Maddie for like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, something like that, where she's just explaining what she's gone through since they'd seen each other last. She just breaks it open that I had to die to leave this world, and you can do it too. And that they're actually the two characters from the Pink Opaque, and that they've been stuck in this dream world reality where they're confined and stuck to just be less than. It's so wonderful, and the way that for most of the scene she's looking away, and then she kind of slowly turns as it gets further in to like face the facts, face the reality, right? She speaks to this metaphor of, you know, having to dig herself under the ground and how she's panicking and there's no air left and you just have to die, you have to let it happen, and that she was able to make it out and that she's willing to do it with him too, and that she's trying to get him to remember who he really was. The big bad in The Pink Opaque is this character named Mr. Melancholy, and literally is a giant moon. And what you find when Owen watches the end of season 5 is basically Tara and Isabel are disconnected, the two women in the series who, there's this, you know, interesting purported sense that we haven't been in reality this whole time and that is the real reality, right? Basically, Isabel falls victim to Mr. Melancholy, both of them do, and they have to drink this thing called like Luna juice, and it's this nasty looking goopy it kind of looks like Ivan Ooze, only it's like white and it looks, you know, like a desaturated moon, like gray, like blue liquid. And in the season 5 finale, they basically just lose, and they're just buried. Like the end is just showing them she's drank the juice, she has gotten all discombobulated, and then they just basically get buried, and that's how they wake up in this other world. That's how it basically ends on a cliffhanger. And if you ever see me looking, I'm referencing things just to make sure that I'm like saying the right names and the right things, because I did only see it once, so I just want to make sure I'm being true to what the names and the people are. You start to feel this build up in the act 2 where they have this scene where Owen is at home watching this again, and he starts to break free of the reality again, and he starts to wonder like, oh no, you're not my real parents, like, oh no. And the dad, just who is always off screen and like watching TV, this idea of like being hypnotized, right? He comes in and he basically just like shoves Owen's face in the water of the tub, and like you can see this metaphor of like coming outside of yourself as this like TV static. Sorry if you hear beeping outside. So it's a lot of interesting parallels because, you know, Buffy almost ended after 5 seasons, right? There's a lot of good parallels and references to those kinds of like 90s shows. And The Pink Opaque is this like really fun romp where the two, you know, girls are always like saving the day. And it's, you know, they have these like pink ghosts on the back of their necks, and that's how they are able to like connect together. So it's hard when it's, you know, it's the season finale where I forgot this detail. I'm like referencing a synopsis here. But yeah, they get their hearts ripped out and they get thrown in the ground and buried and are fed this Luna juice to basically become like submissive and just become like a drone. So all of this happens and you're struggling to realize like, oh no, like Owen's stuck, like Owen's Isabel, right? And you have this fork of thought. You have this fork of like understanding of which way you can choose to go. You can ascribe to the reality that, you know, they really are Isabel and Tara, and that, you know, they can make it out if they want to. And maybe part of you wants, you know, Owen to trust Maddie to go under the ground. And it sounds absurd, but surely they must get out and defeat the big bad, right? Or, and this is what ends up happening on the football field when Maddie goes to take Owen to have them buried, Owen just like shoves her and runs away from her because it's not a reality that feels safe or feels like he can comprehend and move forward with. He doesn't see her again. And a long time goes by for Act 3. That's basically more or less the end of Act 2. Act 3 takes us much further in time where Owen is basically kind of breaking the fourth wall once in a while. He'll just kind of talk at the camera, and it's this idea of like being reflective, right? Having this sense of internal dialogue. And you find that, you know, his father passes away, he ends up inheriting the house, like his whole life just continues on. He mentions to the camera that he has a family that he loves, but we never see them, like spouse and children, allegedly. And he's getting older and, you know, things are progressing. You know, he's getting gray hair, he's slowing down. And a detail I didn't mention is a good through line and a good representation of all of this that we're going to go into after I explain the basic plot is Owen just had asthma. That was just one of the aspects of who he was throughout the movie. And it really comes to a head in the third act because basically he's working at this really large, like kind of Dave and Buster's meets Chuck E. Cheese, kind of like Funland arcade. And he has to do this kid's birthday party, but he's wheezing. He's clearly not well. He's not breathing very well. And there's this scene where they're singing Happy Birthday. And I think Owen just comes to this realization that his whole life is like culminated into this moment of like meaninglessness. And everybody freezes. And in like true A24, like artsy fashion, you know, they put you along in this sense of like normalcy where you kind of feel like something's off. And then it will just pause and like jar you in order to like jerk the plot along. And he just like screams, and he has this like guttural, just crumple down scream, and he goes into the bathroom. He's just looking at the the bathroom mirrors, and there's this moment where you can tell he's questioning. He's looking and wants to look inside himself, and he's just wheezing. He can barely breathe, you know. One of the things Maddie told him was, you know, this place will suffocate you, and the Luna juice will eventually make it to where you die. And you obviously don't have a heart, right? Your heart is disconnected from you. Is on the floor and chooses to, you know, cut himself open and finally look inside. And you can see that, you know, past the static, there's this like beautiful like glow. There's this like beautiful radiance inside. And you can tell that he has this sense of peace looking at it. And after he just kind of like apologizes to people, rather than it being this really climactic turn of events where a character is reformed or decides to do something different, Owen doesn't. He continues just doing the same thing. He goes back to work and apologizes to everybody, and no one even seems to notice him. How does it really end, right? I mean, that's the end of the movie. And that's part of what feels so frustrating about it, I think, for some people. For others, I think it has this really interesting dichotomy of it's hopeful, but it's also devastating depending on what you believe the plot is trying to tell you, right? Depending on what way it goes. But I refuse to believe that this is all just despair, right? And we're going to go into this. There is an article on Vulture by Emily St. James, and she's also trans, and she describes, I saw the TV Glow's ending is full of hope if you want it to be. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of like the metaphors and why I think the movie was structured the way it was, and why and in what ways that poignance pours over into anybody's life. But particularly, it's such a great exploration and really telling of the trans experience. And it's something I think we can learn a lot from as well, and learn to, you know, respect what it takes to be your authentic self and how that can be really hard for some people. Like I said, Emily starts the article, you know, speaking to the fact that this movie is a great parallel for a lot of trans people, and she's speaking to her own experience as feeling like this character in a show. There's this sense of, you know, depersonalization when you're not able to truly be yourself. Really resonated with that idea where you almost feel like you are asleep. You feel like you're dormant when you're not allowed to show up as yourself. She, you know, speaks to this derealization where reality just doesn't feel real, it feels tenuous. There's this sense of having a fake life. And I think Owen and Maddie, or Isabel and Tara, depending on how you want to look at it, are both perfect experiences of how that road can diverge for trans people. There's this option that, you know, Owen chose not to. Owen chose not to open that up in himself in the sense that he opened it up to society. And Maddie allegedly did, right? Because there's this sense of when you bury yourself in the ground and you die, you come out anew. And that was a great metaphor and idea of rebirthing yourself. And for, I think, a lot of trans people, it's obviously not my experience, but I'm just speaking to this article and some of what I understand from the queer lens, at least that I can understand it from. There is this sense of like reinvention you have to have and coming to accept who you are. And sometimes that does feel like a death of the old self. There's a reason for, a lot of trans people, non-binary folk, even people who just change their names in general. That old name to them is a dead name because it's not who they are, and it's not who they are anymore. There is this vague notion that, you were just characters. There's a sense of like misunderstanding. There's just something about, melancholy and nihilism that is able to have you look into the darkness but also appreciate the light. And I think, thank you, Kingdom Hearts, that is something here that is contrasted really well. There's this world that he's in while he's asleep. And for some, that is comforting. And for some, not everybody has the privilege to truly be, out and themselves. And sometimes you have to, like, in her words, like lull yourself or depersonalize yourself into being that identity. But it's not you at the end of the day. Is it a cliffhanger? Is it just this, thing that maybe Owen will come around now that at the end he was able to come to terms with who he really was? I'm sure a lot of people understand and come to terms with who they are, but they might not have the courage to act on it yet. And that's okay too. I think that's another meaning and message from this movie is there's never too little time. There actually is a scene where Owen is going to the movie theater in the chalk in the second act. And it says, I believe it's never too late, I believe, or something similar is written in the chalk on the street. And it feels like, Maddie's trying to send him messages everywhere. It's this parallel, experience that these realities are clashing and they do have a connection of some kind. It just really depends on the watcher to what extent. There is that interesting, repressed memory that does happen where Owen remembers, dressing identical to Isabel. There's this sense of, is this really me? Who am I? There's this question of identity. And he can't go through with it. He locks himself inside. I believe there's something in the arcade as well that says like it's never too late or something like that. There's just constant messages and like subliminal things in the lighting and in other aspects of the film that are like little echoes, little messages. And I think we can all relate to that in some way if we're not living true or authentic to ourselves. We see messages everywhere, even if it's something as simple as a crow or a certain flower that maybe your grandma liked that you feel is a way for her to connect with you. There are all these little idiosyncrasies throughout that undoubtedly show that Maddie and Owen, or Tara and Isabel, have taken very different approaches in the difficulties and the challenges that they've been facing. Yeah, right after he leaves the bathroom, he just apologizes and no one notices and it goes to credits. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article. And again, I highly recommend that you read it and check it out yourself as well. I don't think I have the ability to do external links in my description yet, but hopefully when I do, I'll make sure to add stuff in there when I can. She says, I would never suggest that reading all of the above as a cautionary tale about the perils of fandom or the ever-encroaching tendrils of nostalgia is inaccurate. Yet I find that interpretation lacking. In it, Maddie's second disappearance is likely because she died. At best, she's living a marginal existence somewhere, grappling with a major mental health crisis. The Pink Opaque-themed arcade games at the Fun Center might just be a cheeky wink toward our nostalgia-saturated culture. Owen might just be a man realizing how much of his life he's given away to a TV show with every asthma-induced wheeze. Isn't that rather grim? So let's try something else. Let's assume everything Maddie says is completely 100% accurate. We are not watching a film called I Saw the TV Glow. We are watching the season 6 premiere of The Pink Opaque. We even get a mid-episode music break with a double bill at the double lunch. What if this isn't a movie about loving a TV show? What if it's a movie about being an egg? Now, what she's referring to is a lot of trans media are dubbed egg cinema, basically. So it's talking about the experience coming out of your eggshell. Now, Utena lovers, come on, clock in here. There's this whole theme about, coming out of your egg, coming out of your shell. There's tons of language around this, but a lot of times, talks about metaphors for gender and other things. Obviously, Emily speaks to The Matrix because that is a trans allegory film. What sets the TV Glow apart is how it questions the underlying assumption of egg cinema. You must go through the portal. Owen never returns to her life as Isabel. This is on the assumption that this is the pink opaque and not the reverse. Instead, she quietly suffocates, all the while shuffling through an increasingly torturous life in the Midnight Realm. The dream world is called the Midnight Realm. She's locked up inside. There is still time, but not infinite amounts of it. She is barreling toward death and away from the portal. Now, again, when you hear about Maddie talking about burying herself and the season 5 finale of Isabel being buried, there's this idea of losing air, running out of time. And that's a great way to, having Owen with asthma. It's a great way of showcasing over time what is the cost of not being true to yourself. And it literally can feel like you're not breathing and you're not alive. That was such a light bulb moment for me when I realized that, and I drew those pieces together. I was like, this is all connected. Again, reading a little bit of the article. Viewing this film via the grammar of TV also helps because it recontextualizes its ending, taking it from bleak and hopeless to just another cliffhanger of the pink opaque. Yes, the action of this story is Tara and Isabel reconnecting, against all odds, and Tara attempting to save Isabel and failing. But on TV, there's always another episode. If you are a trans person, the ending is somehow both your worst nightmare, a life you have no agency over, and full of an immense, beautiful hope, because there is, despite it all, still time. It is not for nothing that one of the biggest letterboxed reviews of this film is a coming out post. To be sure, plenty of cis people recognize that the movie's ending is about what happens when a person does not take agency over their life, and also, to be sure, one need not be trans to hate one's body, to experience derealization, to long for an escape to another world. Even within the film, it's possible to read everything that happens as part of Owen's inability to cope with his father's abuse. Except, perhaps, the third act. To be aware you might be trans, but unwilling to do anything about it, is to create endlessly bigger boxes within which to contain yourself. When you're a child, that box might encompass only yourself and your parents. By the time you are a gainfully employed adult, that box will contain multitudes, and the thought of disrupting it will grow ever more unthinkable. So you cease to think of yourself as a person on some level. You think not of what you want, but what everybody expects from you. You do your best not to make waves, and you apologize, if only implicitly, for existing. You stop being real and start being a construct, and eventually you decide the construct is just who you are, and you swaddle yourself up in it, and maybe you die there. There is still time until there isn't. This reading of TV Glow's deliberately anticlimactic, non-cathartic ending cuts against the transition narrative you typically see in movies and TV, in which a trans person self-accepts, transitions, and lives a happier life. Owen gets trapped in a space where he knows what he must do to live an authentic life, but simply refuses to take those steps because, well, burying yourself alive is a terrifying thing to do. The transition narrative posits a trans existence as, effectively, a binary switch between man and woman that gets flipped one way or another, but to make our lives so binary is to miss how trans existences possess an inherent liminality. I love that she speaks to this, because there is this just, again, anticlimactic ending, because it really is all internal, and we see that at the end. You get this glimpse of Owen can see, who he or she, depending on your perspective, really is. And it isn't this huge fanfare. It isn't this cinematic masterpiece of rainbows exploding in the air and pride parades and, she gets what she wants in the end and everything's happy and it ties in a bow. Because for a lot of people, that happens later. It happens never, unfortunately, for some. There's just something really poignant about that exploration, and that we need more media like this. We need more media where, we're able to understand and see things from different people's perspectives and see one piece of media multiple ways. Because some people will walk away from this and think that it's devastating and that it's frustrating. They don't get that sense of fulfillment at the end that we often crave in media. We want that happy ending. We want that Hollywood perfect kiss at the end, or the perfect I did it. Now, there's tons of different interpretations about this that she also speaks to, the sense of nostalgia and the sense of getting lost in yourself and lost in media and consumed by it. So she calls it the dangerous allure of nostalgia as well. I would say she says it's an easy trap for cis viewers. We don't want to be necessarily reductive in that way. I don't, in my opinion, prefer to see it that way. But she says, see, the grimmer read of the film's ending truly is a nihilistic one. It leaves no hope, no potential for growth, no exit. Yet you must actively choose to read that ending as nihilistic. If you are cis and the end of I Saw the TV Glow left you with a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction, a weird but hard to pin down feeling that something had broken, and a melancholy bordering on horror, congratulations, this movie gave you contact high gender dysphoria. In an infinite number of possible universes, there is at least one where I am still living as a man, embracing my fictionality, avoiding looking at how much more raw and real I feel when I pretend to be a woman. I think about that guy sometimes. I hope he's okay. Consider then, my cis reader, that TV Glow is for both you and me, but it is maybe the most of all for him. I hope he sees it. I hope he breaks down crying in the bathroom afterward. I hope he, after so many years locked inside himself, hears the promise of more life through the hiss of TV static. Lovely, so well written, and couldn't have said it better myself, which is why I wanted to use this as a great base. So there are so many infinite choices in universes where we live and where we exist, and our choices do impact our consequences, and they have good and bad consequences. This sense of whether you want to give into nostalgia or whether you took away that you're not your authentic self and the alternative is just being in this state of a twilight where your mind is dim and you feel powerless. This movie has something for everybody. And I know the style and the very slow burn is not something a lot of people will gravitate to because it does have a heaviness, but I don't think it has hopelessness. I don't think it's devoid of some positive glimmers of what's possible. There's so much room for growth, and at any time, even after the film ends, Owen can still make that choice to be Isabel. And like Emily said in the article, there is always hope of listening to the TV static and seeing where it takes you. So I also want to speak to, some aspects of the imagery of the film. There's a lot of popularization around the sense of neon glows and these really dreamy pinks and purples, and this sense of saturation being life and the desaturation being Mr. Melancholy, being this moon character that's just kind of the big bad hovering in the background. It paints a really good picture about certainty and not doubting yourself. Even though in the funhouse there's bright colors everywhere and you think it's this sense of comfort and fun, there's just nothing. It's great because there's so much color, but even still, it almost makes a good juxtaposition from what the rest of the film is speaking to, because there's nothing of fulfillment or true happiness when you look at it from Owen's perspective. There's this sense of, lost time and what do we do with the time we're given? And when we only have so much breath left, are we going to be happy or are we going to break down one day at a birthday party? Maddie has this sense, or Tara has this sense of certainty. She was able to, reportedly come out of this midnight realm, come out of this midnight world and cross over. But she wanted to come back for Isabel. You know me, I'm the artsy creative girl, so I love the idea, and my little heart would love to have them bring back the Pinko Pig and have it be this sequel and have them be reunited, because it's so satisfying to have it that way. But I think there's so much to be said for them not doing that and not making that choice. And the fact that this was, a trans director just speaks to this experience in a way I think that hasn't been done in this way, quite like this anyway. I'm not saying I'm an aficionado with trans media specifically, but I think it just really added to the conversation, and it did it in a way that was approachable and accessible no matter how you identify as. Being, a cis woman, I still got nods about the queer experience in this, and being surrounded by the expectations where you become a character in other people's stories and you do what other people expect you to do. I think, being queer, that felt like a lot of what I took away from Comp Het growing up, and how much that dug deep into me. And you don't even realize that that's how deep the indoctrination goes. You don't realize how deep you can be fed an idea and not brainwashed, but told that this is the right thing to do. So, therefore I must do it. That's why these media pieces are so important to, speak to different perspectives, that you're not alone. And again, I think this article ends on a perfect note that this piece is not only just for, the queer experience, the trans experience, it's for people who haven't yet even come out yet or don't even truly understand themselves yet. Part of it is that experience, and there's no timeline, there's no right day to do it. It's whenever you're ready. And that was a big takeaway from this, that I highly recommend everybody, everybody watch this, please. I'm like geeking out about it. Have you not seen that after the last, I don't know, like 30 minutes I've been talking about this? But explaining this as, this sense of gender dysphoria, of the end of the film kind of clashing with our expectations, that really is, how people might feel if, someone who is, male and identifies as a trans woman, if they have to wear masculine clothes, that might be something that causes them dysphoria and causes them issues where they don't want to present that way and they don't want to be perceived that way. Just the lifelessness of the Midnight Realm was so well portrayed, with just these vacant papers, the fact that the movie theater was always empty. There's always this sense of like a frame, or this sense of like a screen. It's almost got this like echo of the Truman Show, where Owen's always being perceived. Again, whether you choose to think it's because he's in the pink opaque or not, it's so captivating. And I found that by the second act, when everything starts unfolding, you just so badly feel this like she said, this gnawing sense of like you want a resolution, you want to have them break free together. And it was worth talking about. So I hope you like my unscripted rambles. I highly recommend that you watch this film. It's such a great just telling of identity and how it isn't linear necessarily. Even though this happens in 3 acts over the course of someone's lifetime, this could have been told in different ways too, where you're exploring yourself and coming to terms with that too. Because part of it is you have to kind of internally accept yourself first before you're able to show who that person is to the rest of the world and who you want to be. Maddie just felt like such a great contrast to Owen, because even when they reunite the second time, she says, "I'm not Maddie." She has this like resolute sense of who she is. Whereas Owen just kind of has this twilight sense of being, lulled into this midnight realm and this world. Again, I hope you found this useful. I hope you watched the film and tell me what you liked about it and what you didn't like about it maybe. Sometimes when you're watching a film like this, it can be really easy to turn it off. It can be really easy to be like, why is there so much dead air? Or why are these, furtive glances and, moments where they repeat sections. But that's part of the beauty of art. Sometimes it's not what's said, but what isn't said. And in those kind of spaces in between, it can really paint an effective picture. So I'll see y'all later. Make sure you subscribe.